All right, you may think by now you've learned everything that you could possibly know, but there is more. We have one more panel, and this is mobile video for the masses. And what prompted this panel is the realization that video is the source of so much of our traffic. In fact, digital video viewing increased 43% in a year. Consumers watched 43% more digital videos in the second quarter of 2014 than in the same period last year, and nearly 60% of those views came from smartphones, according to an Adobe report. So there's just absolutely no question that as these devices become more powerful, people want to consume more video. And it's not just necessarily entertainment. There are a lot of other types of applications that use video. So we'll be touching on that during this panel. But not to, you didn't come here to hear me speak. And instead, I want to turn it over to our panel, which includes Richard Bennett, founder of the High Tech Forum, Surya, Bommakanti, who is the Vice President of Mobile Broadband Practice for Ericsson North America, and Glenn Gonzales, who is the Vice President of Sales and Business Development at QuickPlay, a company that specializes in mobile video. So I think we will obtain unique insights from these panelists. So Richard, you are next.
Thank you, Peter, and thanks for the invitation, and thanks to everybody who came. So I kind of feel like at this point in the program and at this point in the discussion about mobile data and mobile video, kind of everything that needs to be said has been said almost. So it's going to be a challenge to say something new. The basic questions that I want to address are these, and I think we'll get into some more detail with the other panelists. I don't want to really stress too much the facts and figures about exactly how much the demand for video is growing, because we don't actually know. We only know how much the supply of mobile data and mobile video in particular is growing. It could be that there's an unmet customer need that the networks can't supply, and so we can't measure what we can't deliver, right? So as dramatic as the figures are for the growth of mobile video content, the demand could be even greater than that. In fact, one of Ericsson's figures says, you know, when they asked people what prevents them from consuming more mobile video, about 45% said, well, the cost of bandwidth gets too high. I don't want to pay for a 4 gig plan, you know, a 2 gig plan is so much cheaper. But almost an equal number of people said the cost of the content was discouraging them from consuming more mobile video. So this means like the stuff that you buy from the Apple Store, you know, there's a unit price to that content. So that's a limiting factor as well. But this is just simply on the consumption and entertainment side. But you know, it very well could be, if we could sort of see inside the mind of the consumer, that the actual desire for video, mobile video, is much greater than what our networks can actually deliver today, and much more than what people can actually afford to pay for. And those are both equal factors. And the video growth, the thing to me that's the most significant about it is to realize that, you know, if you take Cooper's law that basically says that the capacity of mobile networks doubles every 30 months, which is a lot slower than Moore's law. So the fact that Moore's law may be coming to an end may not be that significant. It already vastly exceeds that. So that means that you don't satisfy the needs simply by making the routine replacements of equipment with newer equipment. There actually has to be investment over and above what it takes to sort of keep the network afloat to meet this demand. And as we know, mobile networks are changing to increase capacity. I mean, it's pretty much the main thing we've talked about all day, that all the speakers have addressed, densification more efficient forms of coding, the ongoing experiment with multicast. I haven't really heard much about that. But what that means is that on again, off again, there have been various attempts by providers, Qualcomm did this, to set up a channel that was essentially a one-directional channel that did nothing but transmit video. And then you had to be licensed. There were multiple programs in that stream. It's like an over-the-air television stream that you had to subscribe to that had efficiencies because it was only used for video, had efficiencies that the general purpose network can never really exhibit. And I think one of the interesting implications in this space is whether the suppliers of mobile video in the future are going to be primarily mobile network operators, or whether they're going to be over-the-air television broadcasters. I mean, there is such a thing as the ATSC mobile handheld standard for the transmission of television programming to mobile devices. And of course, the general conception is that, well, people really don't want to do broadcast TV anymore. They want to do unicast. You want to be able to, should be user controlled what the content is. You want to view video on demand. But one of the greatest sources of monetization in the video space in general nowadays is sports. And people want to watch sports in real time. I mean, you want to know exactly as soon as it's certain that the San Francisco Giants have lost the World Series in the 7th game again, you want to know that exactly when it happens. And I say that with a deep heart as an Oakland A's fan. But what it means is that when people are watching shows in real time, you can't fast forward, you can't skip the commercials. So the commercials are much more valuable in real-time entertainment. That can, in principle, be provided by the broadcasters. And with the Spectrum incentive auction being delayed yet again, well, that gives them another couple of years to actually make that standard work. So there could be a very interesting tussle between the ability and the desire, actually, of regional television broadcasters to offer products to the public that meet that need. And another thing that's happening, which is independent of network design, is actually the notion that we can embed TiVos in these devices. So their TiVo already has a great iPad app that you can use in conjunction with a TiVo box in your home, where you can download shows off your TiVo box into your iPad and then watch them, on a plane when you can't get connectivity. And you can also use that app to pull shows to your hotel room, across the Wi-Fi network, across the internet and the Wi-Fi network that came from the hard drive that's on the TiVo that's in your home. Now, those two forms of usage don't really put any stress on the mobile network. And they're a way of getting access to entertainment content that don't stress the mobile network. And they depend, obviously, on, we have enough storage. I mean, if you look at storage options in the iPhone 6, it goes up to 128 gigs. You could have a pretty healthy personal video recorder in an iPhone 6. But, that requires some advanced planning. I mean, that's good if, like, you have certain TV shows that you want to watch all the time, but it's not a general purpose solution. It doesn't mean that the demand for higher capacity networks is going to go away. It just means that there are ways to mitigate some of those effects that haven't been fully developed yet, that are based on technologies that are pretty well understood. But at the end of the day, we still need more spectrum. And I think we're in a unique position in the United States in that we have over-allocated spectrum to government uses. And when we were listening to the remarks of Anoy-san's remarks this morning about how much spectrum has been allocated in Japan to commercial networks, and the number was what, like 2,700 megahertz
That's by 2020.
by 2020. And in the US, you know, we're where, 300, 400, 500? And we're fighting for little 20 megahertz chunks. I mean, I don't see any other way to explain that except it's the effect of the Defense Department. And, you know, there's been a lot of discussion in the US about the fact that operators need to share spectrum with the DoD and other government agencies. That can never be that effective. It's never as good as having a single manager for the spectrum that can ensure that it's scheduled in such a way that all the users can get maximum benefit from it. We really are going to have to address the fact that too much spectrum has been allocated to government agencies who don't use it in very efficient ways and don't really have incentives to use it properly. And I've actually written a draft of a paper about that, but it's more of a policy than a technical question. But yeah, there's no way to really get where we want to be without realigning our spectrum policy. Now, the interesting thing, I think, thinking about video for applications other than entertainment is where things start to get, you know, really cool, because we've never had that in the past. Mobile video, just video as a data format rather than simply as movies and television shows and entertainment. One of the applications that was getting a lot of play 4 or 5 years ago, something called mobile augmented reality, where you essentially have something like Google Glass. Google Glass is sort of an imitation of some other products that other companies like Laster Technologies have developed over the past 4 or 5 years. So if your Google Glass is not just there's a camera mounted in it, if it's not just reporting what it sees to your handset, but it's actually going through the network, going into the cloud, into a service that can actually recognize some of those images and give you back information that's based on your location, what you're looking at, the sort of panoramic view of where you are, that can help you when you're doing commercial, like trivial commercial transactions, like you're looking for an apartment to rent. And you look up at a building that has some apartments, and it kind of pops up little indicators on the side of the building that look to you like you're sort of in a video game now. You know which apartments are for rent, which ones have, you can see what the view looks like from inside the apartment. You know, it sort of enhances your whole shopping experience. It turns out retailing is actually an enormously important application for providing the web with a solid commercial foundation, because so much of the monetization of the web comes from commercials, right? And commercials can be, obviously, when you're willing to share information about who you are, where you are, what kinds of shopping preferences you have. You can get advertisements that are more tailored to your interests, that are more relevant to you. Perhaps maybe have to deal with a lower volume of advertisements in general because each advertisement is more valuable. And there's a survey that's been done by the Step 2 company that says shoppers who look at a video of something that they're thinking about buying are 174% more likely to actually make a purchase than those who don't. Now, this could be one of these cases where cause and effect are reversed, because you decided you wanted to buy that Audi all-road four-wheel drive station wagon to drive around Colorado. Having made the decision, you look at the video to just sort of confirm that, you know, what you were going to do anyway was pretty much correct. But there's a lot of value in being able to you think about in sports websites in particular, every single one that you go to now advertises to you with video. I mean, and this is mostly when you're on a stationary device, because they are still a little bit sensitive about burning through your data cap on your mobile device. But it's almost become a norm. I mean, whenever I visit a sports site on the web, you know there's going to be video there. And it's going to be trying to sell you something that, maybe you don't even want. So marketing, mobile marketing is a hugely important application for mobile video. Telepresence and HD voice, these things, to me, they're sort of pedestrian because these are technologies that I spent about 20 years working on. Where am I on time?
You'll need to wrap up soon.
Okay. They're largely undeveloped, and but the thing about today's mobile video is pretty much a one-way proposition where we consume it. And I think the future of that is actually for video to become a two-way thing. And so when you're doing the mobile augmented reality, the significance of that application from the standpoint of network impact is we're now uploading a lot of video. It's not necessarily high quality stuff, and surveillance, home surveillance is another example, although that's stationary. But the advances in network engineering have to permit both massive downloads and also almost equally massive uploads. Not sure that we're paying enough attention to that. And I think one of the factors that started to become very clear in the last year or so is that tablets are not living up to expectations. When the iPad came out, it was touted as like this great paradigm shifting thing. Well, it turns out what it actually indicates is that people want their handheld devices to be a little bigger. And so now with the iPhone 6 Plus, the screen is basically high-definition TV resolution, and Apple touts that it has wide viewing angles. Now, why do you need wide viewing angles if multiple people are not going to be looking at the thing, right? So, it's an interesting feature to design into a handset, basically. And it has this amazing camera that is going to be capturing high-definition images, and some of those are going to go up through the network. And so the sort of normal way, I think, for a lot of people to consume video is across multiple devices. So you start watching a show at home on your PVR. Maybe if you commute to work, you continue watching it when you're on the subway. When you're at work, maybe at lunch, not that anyone would ever watch videos when they're supposed to be working. And you pick up the program where you left it off, and all these different devices have shared information about your reference in the show. So, yeah, we have entirely new patterns of how we consume video. To get some of the sense of the impact that mobile video can have on network load, here's a slide from a couple of different sources. Google's estimation of what smartphone adoption looks like, and these are from a study I've just done for the American Enterprise Institute on the broadband dynamics for both wired and wireless in the G7. Smartphone adoption. In Japan, smartphone adoption is actually, by some estimates, is fairly low. Google thinks only 25% of Japanese have smartphones compared to like over 50% of Americans. But in terms of data usage, everybody agrees that Japan is #1 in mobile data consumption. So how is it that with half as many smartphones, there's roughly 50% more data consumption? I think there's probably more video, people that are riding subways into Tokyo to work that are on the train for a long time every day must be watching videos. Is this what's happening? It's an anomalous figure, and that's the only way I can make sense out of it. So, a few heavy users.
Is there anything that's not running Android is not smart?
Well, yeah, Androids are not. Yeah.
That's probably what it is. They looked at Android.
Well, that would be this, but Google.
It's a different operating system.
But Google says it's 25%. They're lower than Merrill Lynch.
I think it's a lot.
Yeah. I agree that Android is not a smartphone, but it's a wannabe smartphone. So you can guess what I ordered a couple of days ago. When you have a Galaxy S2, anything is smart. So, One of the interesting trends is that mobile video streaming is actually growing faster now than sports streaming is in the mobile space. There's much more video consumption on phablets and handsets and on tablets, but there is an enormous strain on infrastructure. Now, this advertising thing is interesting because it means more money for internet edge services providers, as the FCC calls them. But where's the money going to come from to help the carriers upgrade their networks to carry the load? So there. And this is who I am and how you can get in touch with me and what you should read and what you should tweet. Okay?
All right.
And
Thank
I'm
you, Richard.
looking forward to the questions.
All right, why don't we turn this over to, just press the right arrow.
Okay.
All right, so next speaker is Surya Bommakanti, Ericsson.
Thank you.
Surya.
Peter, thanks very much for the invite to be on the panel. I also had one other thank you to extend, and that's to Glenn for being the only other guy on a panel who's not wearing a tie. So thank you, Glenn. I appreciate that. Keeping me company there.
I was going to wear jeans too.
You were going to wear jeans as well. All right. So I was hoping that what we could do here is set up perhaps a ground rule or two for questions. I work at Ericsson in Dallas, and after Monday evening's game, I was hoping that we would only refer to the NFL from the perspective of a content provider, as an application on your smartphones, and so on. So I was hoping we could establish that as a ground rule for questions. So I know that I may be perhaps disagreeing with Richard, who talked about perhaps a few too many numbers in the presentation. So I thought, what better way to start than with a few numbers in my presentation. So I'll open with that, and I'll actually take the topic perhaps from the masses and back towards mobile video, if that's okay. So my reference to the masses, of course, is a very loving reference. I am one of them, I guess. I carry a smartphone. That's what we're talking about a little bit here. The appliances that we use to consume content. A couple of things here. We talk in Ericsson about a report that we publish twice a year called Ericsson Mobility Report. And effectively what we're saying is that, or what we see is that mobile subscriptions will be tripling by the end of the decade. So that leaves us at about 10 billion. I think someone had referred to 9.2 billion. I think it's probably a similar number there. And I noticed that some of the information doesn't show up exactly how it was intended. But we also, I think, have agreed today, and it's been, we've been looking at this from multiple angles, and there have been remarkably quite a few, a short summary of common threads that have kind of emerged today. In the same vein, I think a couple of numbers are very, very similar. Three of us have talked about growth in mobile data traffic through 2019, and we've agreed that it's somewhere between 59% and 61%, which is about what 10 times over that period translates to, about a 60% CAGR in that time period. But the point here is, in all of that growth, mobile video, now this is video consumed on mobile networks, right? We're talking about mobile video, not necessarily video consumed over your smartphone, but leveraging other network technologies that are non-mobile. We see that as being over 50% of all of that mobile data by the 2019 timeframe. As we talk about smartphone penetration, tablet penetration, and so on, clearly video is growing multi-screen. And I have a quick question, perhaps for you in the audience. Just by a show of hands, quickly, could I just ask, how many of you consumed scheduled TV or a live event video in the last week on a mobile device? Yeah. So on your smartphones, about 4 or 5 people in the room. What that says is that squarely puts us in the over 35 demographic. And I must say, looking at the room, I wouldn't never have guessed. But here we are. So here's some interesting information. We run an operation called Consumer Labs that goes out and does a bunch of primary research, and they collected a series of information bites around the TV and media space. And one of the things that they've remarked on is between 2012 and 2015, consumption of video content over TV screens, over laptops has stayed fundamentally static. On desktops has kind of actually reduced, and clearly on smartphones and tablets has increased. So increasingly so, the smartphone and mobile device becomes kind of a preferred consumption mechanism, right? So coming back to that show of hands, here's the interesting stat that kind of puts a little bit of context to why I asked the question. Typically, we tend to think of streamed content as being what we consume over mobile devices, or over smartphones. Well, the same survey done over about a base of 23 markets, so essentially a global survey where these technologies were available, says yes, sure enough, YouTube and similar services was the majority of was the winner in terms of which content was consumed more. But look at the numbers. It says scheduled TV or live TV accounted for, in terms of viewing habits, people watching that on smartphones at least once a week. That number about 40 to 45% of people. So that is a very interesting stat, and I think when you think about that, it says that there's something to be said for scheduled TV still having long legs, in at least where we would least expect it to on mobile devices or smartphones. And it also says that there's probably a social network effect from the live events perspective, and I think Richard referred to that as well. So clearly streamed content is growing as a proportion, but interestingly downloaded content is a pretty big use case as well. So if you put these things together, then what are some of the network techniques that we're using to actually help us cope with this? Well, one of the questions that Peter wanted to ask or wanted addressed by this panel was around which networks we're using to consume this. So I thought I'd preempt the question with a little bit of information here. The same Consumer Labs outfit put together this research, and the purple, I hope it's purple on the right-hand side, the two right-hand side bars in each data point there represent the UK, and the two blue, I hope, bars on the screen there represent the US. And what that kind of says is that the availability of content, the pricing of data packages has a big role to play in what network you choose to consume content over. So if you look at the UK, you'll find that they perhaps don't have quite the same data pricing packages as we do enjoy in the US. And so you see that as you go from a snacker or light user of video, learnt that term from a TV and media person last week, as a snacker of content, you might outpace Wi-Fi might be your preferred medium for watching that content, and it might outpace mobile networks by 4 to 1 or thereabouts. When it goes to heavy users, that ratio is more like 10 to 1. But in the US, it's not quite as dramatic. So what that says is that in the US, we're much more prepared than in the UK to consume content over mobile networks compared to Wi-Fi only. So I think that's probably quite an interesting thing for mobile network operators, but it also implies that we need to do things to make that more efficient. Otherwise, the economics of providing that content consumption or feeding that content consumption habit kind of gets out of kilter. So this is where a couple of speakers so far have referred to technologies like LTE broadcast, which is a nicer term than the original standards-based term that we gave it of EMBMS. But really, LTE broadcast is suggesting that I think John from Qualcomm talked about this a little bit. That once you get multiple users in a cell consuming fundamentally the same content or the same content, then if you've got it as scheduled content, and we observed a couple of slides ago that people are still consuming scheduled content, if it's live content, and we've observed again that people absolutely are consuming live content on smartphones, and it's not only streamed content, then the economics improve greatly if you actually leverage LTE broadcast. Of course, unicast is, through mobile networks, is kind of what we're all used to. This is how we pull the latest YouTube video or stream content down. And of course, LTE broadcast has multiple applications, but I'll just talk about a couple of use cases coming up. And I think the question really becomes what's holding us back. And I think technology is starting to really get put in place. I think the network technology is fundamentally there. And from a device perspective, we started to see devices that enable this mechanism to be deployed. And I think one of the Tier 1 operator CFOs remarked over the last week that probably by this time next year, we'll have enough devices in at least the US market to be looking at LTE broadcast as a viable mechanism for distributing content. So here's just a pretty picture of something someone talked about earlier, and that is, large live events. Obviously, we in Ericsson talk a little bit about the network society, about how we consume content through smartphones, about how everything that can be connected will be. Well, here you have, somewhere between 40 and 100,000 rabid users of this technology, right? You don't get a greater concentration typically than in some of these mass or live events. And so we're talking now about the ability for a fan sitting in a stadium to observe what's going on in parallel games, perhaps in other parts of the city, the world, the country, or to look at the same game but through a closer viewing angle on their smartphone or multiple viewing angles. This is the kind of content that clearly more than one user in that cell is likely to consume and clearly can be kind of scheduled and broadcast. So there's one use case. Another would be, of course, another kind of live event, and that would be kind of a instant media services is one way to put it, but breaking news is an example of that. So again, it's really a question of a concentration of users to make the economics work. And before we get there and deploy it, it's really all about having the ecosystem in place from a device perspective. So I'll leave it there. There are multiple, I think, other users for LTE broadcast, but if you have questions about that, we can address it either in the panel or afterwards.
All right.
All right? Thank you.
Very much. All right. So now our final panelist, Glenn Gonzales of QuickPlay. And just press the right pointing arrow.
I want to thank Patrick as well for inviting me to the panel. It's my first year, and I wish you guys actually didn't wear jackets. I would have left mine at home. But I'm not sure it was a smart thing to let the sales guy be the last guy to speak. So, I promise I'll try not to sell you guys something during this presentation. So some of the key things that we want to talk about, just to give you a little bit of overview of QuickPlay. I'm sure a lot of you haven't even heard of us. You got big names like Ericsson, AT&T, Nokia, Qualcomm, and so forth that are big players in the industry. We're more behind the scenes, and I think some of the Qualcomm folks are actually going to see some of these slides as very similar to what they've seen in the past. So we're a managed services provider that delivers video for our customers, which are typically operators, pay TV operators, to deliver OTT and TV Everywhere services. So the slides kind of got a little bit messed up, but the whole premise again is tied to what Qualcomm talked about at their previous summit was, the data growth on traffic is going to continue to grow over the years, 1,000x. And 2/3 of that traffic is going to be tied to video. More devices are just going to be coming out. We're going to see about 25 billion connected IP devices by 2018, and 8 billion of those right now are currently smartphones and tablets. And more than half of that are going to be non-handheld type of devices, including connected car, smart TVs, connected TVs as well. So just to show some of the consumption that you've seen here, this is the graph on the right is tied to just online video consumption, and as you continue to see tablets and smartphones grow, you see a huge increase on game consoles. Obviously, if you have kids that are playing, the Xboxes or the PlayStations, they're utilizing that. They're in their rooms for hours on end. And on top of that, you're seeing higher end bit rates of content, HD content that's going to those devices, so you're seeing a huge uptake in that type of consumption. And then on the left side, the mobile data usage, as we indicated, is about more than half of the consumption that's being utilized on these networks is video. Asia being higher end. They're all kind of close in proximity as far as percentage-wise, followed by North America and then Europe. So, you know, we talked about disruption on what happens on these type of new business models that are coming into play into the marketplace, especially around pay TV. I mean, a lot of people that are consuming content, you know, we talked about how scheduled TV is really not being utilized today, especially for the folks that are under 35, and they're really, those are the cord cutters. So, and with the technology that's here today, you know, a lot of the barrier to entry was the content providers, especially the premium content providers. But you're starting to see the models of Netflix and Hulu's and so forth, and the announcement of HBO that's going to debundle from a typical cable subscription. So the pay TV model is now being decreased from a revenue perspective, and 50% of those users actually are no longer pay TV subscribers. On the swing side of that is that you're seeing OTT viewership increasing. So, and that's also based on content providers rolling out new services. These, you know, there's a huge opportunity for mobile operators to take advantage of the 250 billion revenue for pay TV to start getting a piece of that pie and not just be a pipe to deliver these type of video services. So, you know, and you see that with Verizon's announcement of making some acquisitions on the OTT space. They're also going to try to sell video services as well. You see AT&T's announcement with the JV that they did with the Churning Group, $500 million investment to launch these type of OTT service to target the millennials of the world. And then it's highly fragmented. So this is also good for the content providers. So typically what you've seen in an industry is that when you're a content producer or content owner, you got to go through traditional means to sell your content. Now they're going, you know, creating their own YouTube channels. They have their own MCNs, and they have huge subscriber bases that are watching their content. So this is a good new distribution model for them to deliver their content directly to the consumer. And then as these global broadband networks are being rolled out, you're going to start seeing more quality of service across these types of video being delivered to any IP-connected device. So some of the things that we're seeing as far as next generation TV is the growth of all the content moving into the cloud, as we mentioned, on the, you know, the proliferation and the portfolios of all these devices that are coming out, that you're going to start seeing new types of content that's being introduced into the marketplace. Again, new class of TV providers, the unbundled model, to where you start seeing not only your premium content providers like the Games of Thrones or your ABC type of content, but more things that are tied to MCNs where the content is being delivered directly to the consumer. And then business models. We talked a little bit and added about advertising. You know, the technology there is now to deliver one-to-one advertising. The ad inventory is not necessarily there, but this is huge opportunities for operators to start delivering on those live streams directly to the consumers. Again, we're seeing about 70% of the mobile traffic is going to be video by 2018. The trends that you're seeing, people that do watch video on mobile devices are watching at least 30 minutes of that content. The interesting stat here too is that people that are actually watching live channels on mobile devices are 5 times more likely to watch the live channels than they are video on demand, which is interesting to me. This just talks about what we're really focused on with our partnership with Qualcomm is helping these operators to be more efficient on delivering that video. So we're working closely with them on trials and deployments of LTE to make sure that we can deliver these streams into that particular model where it's more effective on the network. I won't go into too much. I think a number of people already talked about LTE broadcasts. You know, we've also taken over the Qualcomm media flow facility, so you know, we're running about 600 plus channels out of that facility and managing about 40,000 VOD assets right now across all of our data centers worldwide. So being able to deliver that content over broadcast, excuse me, is going to provide high quality and obviously be more efficient on the network. This just talks about you know, the dynamic switching between unicast and broadcast. So, you know, how I see this playing out is that it's not only just for mobile operators. You're going to start seeing local broadcasters going to start playing into this model as well. And then also, you know, the content providers, again, that are bypassing the traditional means of TV and going directly to the consumers by leveraging this type of technology. So just of the benefits that we talked about, again, it's not another network. They're going to leverage the LTE network that's in place, leverage that same spectrum for broadcast. It's going to be more effective to deliver that content. Excuse me, and as more and more of these LTE broadcast devices are on the market, then it's just going to be that much more efficient to introduce new models into delivering a video. And here are some of the use cases. There's been a lot about venue casting. But there's also areas we talked about, live news that was mentioned as well. But you could also deliver video on demand. So especially if you like your TV episodes, if it's broadcast the night before, we can deliver that during off-peak hours over an LTE broadcast network and start dripcasting that to all the devices, including a connected car. So there's use cases of, soccer mom driving around in a big city to where the kids are just in the backseat watching, their kids' content the next day or the next morning. So this is actually my last slide again. The whole focus is really around video is going to continue to increase and making sure that the networks are there to provide the quality of service needed for video consumption. And I think, with LTE broadcast, that's the next step evolution of delivering that content in a more effective and quality manner. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. All right, I have just a couple of questions, and I'm going to turn it over to the audience. So maybe a question to beginning with Surya. So we're seeing all this growth in mobile video. Do you think that, and you also mentioned that a lot of video consumption is actually in the US over mobile networks, not necessarily on Wi-Fi? I think you had something to that effect, right? Or someone
Yeah, I think the point there really is that Wi-Fi is not the unique mechanism that
Right.
people go to, and it seems to be as a result of pricing policies and other things, and also the cost of content and so on. So yes, people are using mobile networks a little more in the US than they do elsewhere.
And do you think that our networks are going to have to respond with huge gains in capacity? I'm trying to avoid the word massive. It's been overused today. It's my fault. I introduced it for the workshop.
So I think there's probably a couple of things. First is that yes, mobile networks are going to have to grow in capacity, but it's not around just a broad-based capacity increase. It's actually about capacity where users are going to consume content or are going to generate demand. So we heard about small cells. We talked about in-building earlier. I mean, it's no secret that 70 to 75% of our mobile data consumption is actually indoors. Mm-hmm. So I think the indoor market is a very important one. We've got, previous speakers talked a lot about kind of the changes needed in the industry to make small cells really go from the scale they're at to the kind of the next order of magnitude in terms of scale of deployment. So I won't belabor that. But I think, yes, a significant capacity increase, but directed to where demand kind of is generated.
Okay.
I think the other thing that maybe we didn't really talk about was that we've talked about LTE broadcast as a technique, for example, but there are other techniques in quite a different sense to be used with video and mobile video in particular. I mean, there's encoding technologies like H.265 or high-efficiency video codec technologies. There's compression technologies that deliver significant gain. I think we've benchmarked HEVC is probably delivering anywhere between a 35 and 50% gain right. in terms of, or reduced bandwidth for the same kind of similar quality. Then there's adaptive bit rate and those sorts of things that actually can make a significant difference as well. So we see that there's probably up to a further 25% gain that you can have, whether you have a current generation H.264 codec or a next generation H.265 codec, and so some of those things will be pretty important in the network as well. And of course, not all of those technologies are accessible through today's devices, but as it gets embedded more and more, I think that becomes another important thing to do.
Yeah, and it also seems that there's greater intelligence that could be in the cloud, because if I'm streaming to my smartphone, it may have high definition resolution of display, but I really don't need that many bits hitting my phone to have an enjoyable viewing experience.
Yeah, you just really captured one of the points of the adaptive bitrate technology.
Right.
Yeah. So different form factors, different quality requirements and needs. And today, you self-select that, right? You go to iTunes or you go to some other place where you consume content, and you start by self-selecting, kind of like the movie trailer example. How big do I want the image and what resolution do I want it at? Instead of that, you're hopefully going to make that a lot more seamless for the user.
Yeah, for example, in Netflix, buried deep inside your settings for your account, you can say, I want to view video in low resolution mode. And your video consumption goes down from a gigabyte per hour to 300 megabytes an hour, right? So if you're on some restricted plan, that makes a difference. But so maybe that's a question for Glenn. Do you see the content providers becoming more involved in trying to match content with people's plans, service plans?
It is. I think the content providers are leaving that more up to the service provider.
Okay.
And again, it's giving the user the choice to say, do you want the low bandwidth resolution or the high bandwidth resolution? One of our customers up in Canada, Bell, we do that where they have a $5 package, and they try to limit it on the limited data plans to say, all right, $5 of content gives you 10 hours of, or excuse me, $5 and you get 10 hours of content, and they just replenish that based on a variety of packages, and they get to choose the type of bandwidth that they want. So, the specs, again, with the adaptive bit rate, the content providers really look at all the coding variants that come into play when playing their content. They certainly want a specific type of quality across all these networks, so it hits all those different types of resolutions that a user can choose.
Right, that's very thought-provoking. There's much more to video than just providing greater network capacity. So I think at this point, I'm going to turn it over to the audience, beginning here. Norimasa from
Norimasa from NICT Japan. It's not a question, but a quick response to Richard's question about how we use the smartphone, to consume that much data. I have two theories. One is just the simple fact that most people in Japan commute by train rather than by car, so we have more time to spend on playing with our smartphones. The other theory is related with connectivity. So, for example, if you take a train in Japan for half an hour, I imagine that you'll be able to spend most of your time, watching YouTube video on your smartphone. But here in the United States, I take metro from DC downtown to Fort Church, like 25 minutes. But I can watch just a few YouTube videos because most of the time I'm not connected to LTE network. So I think that's the better connectivity ends up consuming more data.
So you're saying in Japan, in the public transportation, you have continuous connectivity?
More continuous. And,
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks to Docomo,
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
So in Japan, people consume more mobile video because they have better trains. I believe that. I believe that's true, yeah. The DC Metro trains are the same technology that the BART system in San Francisco has, but BART has they have an onboard Wi-Fi system that you pay money for to use, and so people are connected pretty much the whole time they're commuting to work into San Francisco. But it's, the subway system across the U.S. is a total disaster. I mean, it's a mess in terms of different standards and lack of uniformity, and it's pretty much all, a lot of the subway systems are massively out of date. I wanted to that the first question that you asked to Surya, I mean, to me, there's sort of a slightly different way to frame that question. We know that mobile data growth mobile data consumption is growing at a rapid rate. Will it be sufficient to sort of treat mobile data growth as a general purpose phenomenon to meet the needs of the future, or do we have to do specific things in the way we design, deploy, and operate networks to accommodate video? Because there are special things you can do for video, but then there's sort of the general purpose problem. So if you take all the video consumption out, is the rate of growth that dramatic? And
Quick comment, maybe. I think you've kind of said maybe a couple of things in that comment, but the first part I would certainly agree with, which is that you have to certainly look at networks and what you're carrying over the network, and we have an excellent case study right now that's unfolding and has been over the last couple of years and will continue, I guess, over the next few months to a year, and that is the case of voice over LTE. If you draw the parallels, what the user expectation and experience has been with voice over, 3G or 2G circuit switch voice, and translating that to a parallel experience or a similar experience for the users that are still using that kind of voice rather than, over-the-top services. It's obviously taken a significant investment and study of networks and how they need to be configured and how they need to be set up and tuned and optimized, and I think absolutely the same is true for video. It's just that in video, clearly we have a different set of factors. We talk about, it's not only high definition versus standard definition, it's as you start consuming it over different screen sizes, you start to look at it differently. The types of video consumption are a little bit different from, as I called it, snacking on kind of small clips or of content versus watching scheduled TV and that kind of thing. So I think there's no doubt that we'll have to do work with the network, at the network end to optimize the network for video carriage. And if you take it out as it is mobile data traffic growth significant, well, I mean, we're saying video is probably over half by the end of 2019, but today it's probably 40%. So it's a pretty significant part of mobile data consumption already.
Right, okay, thank you. Questions? Michael?
This question is probably for Surya or Glenn. So if you look at 4K video and you think about you have H.265 compression, you've got an adaptive bit rate, what kind of guaranteed bit rate do you really need to deliver 4K video? Is that something that's doable, I guess, is the question, over LTE, or is that more of a pipe dream, something better reserved for movie theaters and fixed wireline networks in the near term? Thanks.
You want to take a shot first, or? Go ahead. Well, we are seeing requirements from the content providers to support 4K over the top. And I think a lot of the use cases is really taking that device to where you can HDMI connect that to your connected TV and push that out. Now, as far as the bit rates, I mean, it'd have to be probably higher than 2 megabits just to get that type of content. But you would have to use Dash as a protocol to make sure that it gets to that
My
to those
understanding of
devices.
4K video is that it runs at 15 megabits per second. But is that?
Yeah.
It'll work at lower rates. I mean,
You can do it at lower?
You have a lot of choice about how much compression you do. And we have something that looks like HD video that is supposed to have 20 megabits per second from the tower. But cable companies stomp some of those streams down to closer to 1 meg. It's just
I think especially for venues, like when we talked about LTE broadcast and, a lot of the use cases around the pregame show, so people that are actually tailgating at the event that are bringing their connected TVs to that venue, that they're going to want for the highest quality that you can get. So I think we're, from a network perspective, we're going to have to support 4K.
How about a couple of questions maybe for Surya? The first one is around the user interface, usability, fragmentation. So I've tried to use video a couple times. Usually I'm out and about, and maybe I want to catch a sporting event from my alma mater, or one of my favorite teams, which isn't the Cowboys or the Redskins. But it just doesn't seem that easy. Like I just want to type on my phone. I type it into my Google search bar. It comes up, and then you click on it, and maybe it says you have to pay or you have to sign up. But it just seems like you go through these endless screens of these. Who knows how reputable companies that are saying, oh yeah, we have the video that you want to watch live stream, but it never works. So how user-friendly is this, video for the over 35 crowd in the room here? That's the first part of the question.
I'm not really sure how to answer that, Andy. Okay, but I will say that, look, I'll give you a reflection rather than maybe an answer. And the reflection is, we look at innovation in different areas, right? And clearly, user interface innovation has been, a very tremendous kind of driver for consumption, right? So first, I'll give you just the thought there is, with, not wanting to be kind of offensive to anyone in the room who might be a content provider in this way, but compare a TV viewing experience where you're scrolling through endless channels ranked in channel number order, looking for content, versus like the Netflix model, which not only delivers up content in a much more easily consumable format, but it's fundamentally easily searchable, but it's also something that their user interface innovation has really been about the recommended content. It's not like they have all the content that you want, but what they're really doing, half of what they're doing really is they're recommending content that you might like to watch based on, the preferences that you've built up over time. So the reflection I would offer, rather than perhaps a specific answer, is I think user interface innovation has been pretty significant kind of driver for consumption.
If I could add to that, it's not a technology issue.
Yeah.
It's a content rights issue.
Right.
Right. So, if you look at Verizon that spends over $1 billion on the NFL, like you can only consume it on that device, right? Like for your favorite team. Otherwise, you can search on it and get live stats on it, but you're not going to see the video unless the content rights are more open to all the carriers.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out a good way to answer the question, because the people that I know that watch a lot of video online, I'm not sure how legitimate the video is from a content rights perspective. The second part of the question is, who do you see as the winners and losers? Is it the Netflix, the Hulus, is it the Verizons? Who's really the winners and losers with this mobile video?
To me, I think, Glenn alluded to in his talk, I mean, I don't think we've seen yet all the business models come to the market that we're going to. It's who's paying for this? I mean, someone alluded to earlier, someone talked about, the subsidies of the eventual link between, say, a network operator and the user, and the fact that you might subsidize a piece of the network, you might subsidize more the consumption device than you used to in the past. Some of these things are changing. In the same way, I think, business models are as yet unclear. So I don't think the winners are determined as yet by the technology they possess and so on. It's really, I think, which business models are going to get traction over time.
If I could jump in on that, I think one of the trends that you want to watch to get an answer to that is what happens with HBO's unbundling of their content from cable companies. Because, one of the possible trends is that content creators deliver it directly to consumers, and they cut out the intermediaries that have been doing the carriage. Because, I mean, if you actually look at what Netflix does, up until very recently, they were leasing facilities from Amazon to recode video that they then distributed to people over content delivery networks that they leased from Akamai and Level 3 and all. And so what was their actual value proposition other than helping people find programming that they might want to watch? But if you know what you want to watch, if you want to watch MLB.TV, that works really well on mobile devices. You got to be out of market to the teams that you're watching when you do it. But, they've got, everything's live, and they have, after the games are over, they archive them, do compressed games and all this stuff. The quality's, pretty passable. you have to pay for it. But you can watch it on smartphones, on iPads, and all that. So they're big enough as a content creator that they can have a direct relationship with the consumer, which is what I think every content creator of any size, wants to have. And so I think the big losers are going to be the traditional intermediaries.
Well, I would actually, I personally, I don't want to write off the traditional intermediaries very quickly. I mean, their assets are huge. They've built them up over a significant period of time. We've already talked about some of these assets being pretty scarce, like spectrum, and we increasingly see the big players in the market going after a marriage of content and distribution, right? And if you look at what Comcast has done from a content perspective, and what AT&T is trying to do with DirecTV, for example, I think that starts to tell us that, look, people who will Glenn, you talked about the amount that Verizon paid for rights to NFL content outside stadiums and so on, so to mobile devices, basically. So it's those marriages, or as they put that together, you take significant existing assets, and if you have the depth of pocket, so to speak, to go after content and put those things together, looks like that's going to be a pretty formidable combination.
I think the wireless operators are in a good position to be the winners here. As you mentioned, some of the big name content providers are going direct to consumers, but there is a lot of content that is out there that an operator can go get rights to deliver these to the millennials that are going to constantly watch that content and pay for it. So, and I think, Netflix is going to continue to do well. But people that want to be in Netflix are going to be the losers. In my opinion, the people that actually own the networks are going to, and they do it the right way and can come up with an OTT service that they can roll out, are going to increase their revenue, come up with the right advertising model, and they'll be the winners.
So I wanted to just ask, given the delay in the incentive auction, is there any prospect that broadcasters are going to find a role for themselves in mobile TV?
Oh, I addressed that during my talk, but you were asleep. I think it's possible, yeah.
So what would they do?
Well, they would take some of their spectrum and assign it to ATSC MH, and they would just start streaming programming out. It depends on handset manufacturers being willing to put ATSC MH antennas and receivers and devices, and it's pretty difficult to even get a smartphone that has an FM receiver. I mean, you can find them, they do exist, but it's not common.
In my opinion, like the Mobile 500 and all those type of alliances that were set up really didn't see the uptake that they were going to see to deliver that over a traditional broadcast method. But as LTE broadcast rolls out, there's a lot of these local broadcasters that want to deliver their traffic over that network. So I think
maybe Mediaflow was right, they were just too early.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
All right, let's take one more question. Well, all right, I have a simple question then. So when cellular phones came out, it was hard, it would have been hard back in the 80s or 90s to envision that we reach a day where you could talk for an unlimited amount of time each month, every minute of the day, 24, for 30 days a month, and have free long distance thrown in for a low monthly fee, right? I mean, that's an amazing, amazing achievement. So do any of you envision that in the next 10 or 20 years that we'll get there with mobile video, that we can consume as much as we want over our mobile networks for some fixed, reasonable fee per month?
I think
can we envision that, or does that just seem
carriers
impossible?
are really good at letting us have unlimited consumption of things we don't really care about. I mean, it's a statistical bet, right? If you have a smartphone because you want to watch cat videos, then the amount of telephone calls and text messages, I mean, and the stress that puts on the network is pretty much not measurable. Mm-hmm. So that presupposes that we'll have an application that is so much more massively data consumptive than today's video streaming that video streaming becomes a rounding error on the bandwidth budget.
Right.
So that, to me, that implied, that's when we're doing holographic conferencing, and we'll get that from our gigabit networks at home, because that's about the only app that, really thrives at a gigabit that you can't run at 100
That'll be
megabits
the
per
app that we
second.
can't afford to use.
So, yeah, when we have holograms, then sure.
All right. Well, maybe on that note, we'll call it a wrap. All right, so, well, I would like to thank Georgetown University very much for hosting today and their excellent facilities, the generosity and supporting this event and promoting it and so forth, for MCPC, for many people flying from Japan to join us today, and their support of this event as well. I hope everybody will join us at our next workshop, which will be, again, in Atlanta in April on connectivity models for Internet of Things. And unless, Carolyn, did you want to add anything? Or?
I think this is not going to be taped or whatever, which is fine. I just wanted to thank all of you. I know most of the audience at this point is more technology focused than policy focused, but I think the point that was made earlier today is pivotal to realize the sort of future that you guys are painting, and that is there needs to be the right policy environment that can foster and sustain the sort of innovation, business model experimentation, technology innovation that you guys are talking about. And in answer to your question, just to bring it full circle, one of the reasons why you have such a terrible experience in the metro is less about what the carriers are doing or not, and more about what the government is allowing the carriers to put into the tunnels, which, in Washington, D.C., this is hard to believe, but I actually worked on this when I was at a law firm. It required an act of Congress to open up the area on Capitol Hill to more than one company providing infrastructure to provide cell service. So some of these things that appear to be consumer-driven or consumer behavior are sometimes, at least in this country, entirely because of government either failure to act or acting in a way that is contrary to this path to innovation that we're talking about. So thank you all very much for coming to Georgetown, allowing Peter to partner with us and bringing you all to DC, and hopefully we can continue this partnership next year. So thank you all very, very much.
All right.